Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alan Gould. I'm the Executive Director of the Drinko Academy here at Marsh University, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this, the 6th Annual Drinko Symposium. And it is now my pleasure to introduce President Dan Angel, who will give some opening remarks. President Angel.
Good afternoon. We're delighted to have you with us this afternoon. Today is a very special time for Marshall University. As you know, this is a very significant celebration of academics. It begins this afternoon with the John Deaver Drinko Symposium, which will be the first one that my wife Patricia and I will be experiencing. I do want to take a moment just to introduce my wife Patricia in case you haven't met her, Pat Angel. And I should share with you, when I was back in college, I didn't really get into the arts very much as a freshman. And when I met my wife-to-be, our first date, she took me to the art museum. So you can tell the impact on my life since that time. This is a very special symposium kicking off our celebration of academics, and today it will be the John Deaver Drinko Symposium, and then it will accumulate tomorrow with a number of activities, and we're hoping you'll be able to join us for all of those. I would like to extend a special welcome to Doctors John and Elizabeth Drinko. I'm delighted to get to see them and meet them because I've read about them for several months now, and they have done so much for Marshall University. It's a special treat to have you on campus and to meet you both. We're also pleased to have their daughter, who is visiting with them from Arizona, Elizabeth Lee Sullivan. Elizabeth, would you stand, please? And as I say, this is a great celebration period for Marshall University. We're delighted at everything we've done in terms of technology, athletics, but we never want to forget the number one job here is academics. That's what we're here for. That's what we excel in, and we're delighted to kick off this symposium today. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, President Angel. Before introducing our principal program, I'd like to take this opportunity to second the remarks of President Angel and publicly thank the authors of this academic celebration, two wonderful people, Doctors John and Elizabeth Drinko. John and Libby are extremely generous people. At last count, they sponsor programs and chairs and projects at 23 institutions of higher education across the country, as well as here at Marsh University. And as evidence of their generosity, over the past 13 years under their sponsorship, no less than 22 distinguished scholars have visited our campus and by their contributions enriched academic programs in 16 different departments. Then approximately 6 years ago, almost to the day, we established the John Deaver Drinko Academy, which among other initiatives calls for the addition of distinguished professors to our permanent faculty and for the identification from our standing faculty of distinguished Drinko fellows. And I'm proud to say that to date, again, thanks to the Drinkos, we have added 3 distinguished professors to the faculty and have honored 7 of our faculty as Drinko fellows. So again, please join me in thanking Elizabeth and John Drinko. As the President suggested to you in his opening remarks, today's symposium is one of a number of events sponsored by the Drinko Academy, the John R. Hall Center for Academic Excellence, and the University Honors Program as part of the annual celebration of academics. So before proceeding, I'd like to share with you some of these events. First, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning in the lobby of the Drinko Library, there will be an unveiling of a unveiling of a portrait of our former president and Mrs. J. Wade Gilley. The portrait was commissioned by John and Libby Drinko, and the artist, Mr. John Martin, who also painted the portrait of John that is in the library, will participate in the ceremony. And secondly, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to attend the Elizabeth Gibson Drinko Honors Convocation set for 11 o'clock tomorrow morning in this theater. And really, I encourage you to come because this is the one time of the year that we collectively acknowledge our honor students as well as some of our distinguished faculty members. And the convocation's guest speaker this year is former President Dr. J. Wade Gilley. And last, rounding out our celebration, at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, we will have a ceremony dedicating the Ashland Commons. Through the generosity of Ashland Incorporated, we now have a beautifully landscaped campus interior, and tomorrow afternoon we'll have the opportunity to collectively express our appreciation to Mr. Paul Chilgren, Chairman of the Board and CEO of Ashland Incorporated, who will be at the dedication of the Commons. So again, I invite all of you to attend these very special events, and in concluding these opening remarks, I want to invite you to attend a very special reception honoring our distinguished guests and participants that will be held in the lobby of this theater at the conclusion of today's program. The principal speaker of this year's presentation of the John D. Drinko Symposium is Dr. Robert P. Alexander, Distinguished Professor in the Department of Market Management. The topic and title of his program is Timber, the Times and Life at Cass, West Virginia. Without doubt, our latest Drinko Fellow is a true son of Marshall University. A native of Cabell County, West Virginia, he graduated from Milton High School, and they must have liked him because they put him on the Hall of Fame out there. He graduated from Marshall University in 1957 with a BA in Business Administration. While he was at Marshall, he was elected president of the student body in 1956. Later, he served for 10 years on the Marshall University Alumni Board and was president of the University Alumni Association. 3 years after obtaining his bachelor's degree, he earned an MA from Marshall in Education Administration. And in 1969, he received the PhD from Ohio University with a major in Business Administration. A year following graduation in 1958, he joined the Marshall University Administration as Director of Career Planning and Placement. And aside from a year's sojourn at Ohio University, our Drinko Fellow spent over 40 years in higher education here at Marshall University. In 1969, he joined the faculty as an associate professor in the Department of Management in the College of Business. 1972, he was appointed chair of that department, a position he held until his appointment in 1983 as dean of the College of Business. He served as dean until 1991, at which time, in recognition of his outstanding contributions to his college and to his community, he was appointed to the position he presently holds of Distinguished Professor of Management in the Elizabeth McDowell Lewis College of Business. Now, time does not permit me to give a complete accounting of our fellow's professional accomplishments and his contributions, and there are many. But time being of the essence, I will simply say, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the Drinko Fellow for academic year 1999-2000, Dr. Robert P. Alexander.
That certainly was a fine introduction. I've been around here for almost a half a century, and I get somewhat emotional about the events of Marshall, whatever they be, whether it be a football game, whether it be a function like this, or whether it be the classroom. Let me say to you that it's a pleasure to be a fellow, a Drinko fellow, for the year 2000. I'm especially thankful to John and Elizabeth Drinko for all that they have done for Marshall University and so many other institutions. Sometime in the late 60s, I remember reading a publication from Cleveland State University. In that magazine, there was a long article discussing how the Drinkos had contributed so much to that university. Dr. Bernard Queen, the development officer for Marshall, and I believe the person who made that office what it is today, had an office next door. I showed him the article. Later, he visited the Drinkos. He told about how well they had received him. The details of this meeting speaks volumes for the Drinkos and for their expanding generosity towards Marshall. My thanks again. And my thanks from the faculty and students, past and present and into future, for all the benefits that you have bestowed upon this university with your kindness to date and in future years. Dr. Gould, who directs the Drinko Academy, is a well-recognized scholar. He continues to render outstanding service to Marshall. I am grateful to him in the selection process. He is a Marshall graduate and continues to further Marshall's causes locally, in the state, and in the nation. Dr. and Mrs. Gilley served this university for nearly 10 years, leaving a true legacy. When Dr. Gilley arrived, I asked myself, what new could be done? Having served Marshall, as I have said, for nearly a half a century, it seemed to me to be a reasonable question. Well, let me tell you something that most of you already know. The answer to that question was plenty. Dr. Gilley, I could say so many things to you, and thank you for so many things. I don't believe he's arrived yet. He's on his way in. But just let me say it for the audience here that there's so many things that he's done that we're so grateful for. And among those, having been a former president of the Alumni Association, I'd like to say on behalf of the thousands of Marshall alumni, the restoration of Old Main. I'd like to thank him for that. In discussing with Dr. Gould my work as a Drinko Fellow, my mind drifted back a quarter of a century. In 1974, I started a project which more or less was shelved while I served in many administrative capacities at Marshall. In addition, was elected to the Huntington City Council, including a term as mayor for a period of 16 and a half years. Being a Drinko Fellow has allowed me to return to finish this project. As a young administrator in 1958, in a cabinet meeting discussing high school visitation, the subject of the Eastern Panhandle was mentioned. I remember the comment, "We don't go over there because no students come that far to Marshall." My comment was, maybe it's because we haven't shown an interest. Much discussion followed, and finally I said, "I'll go." Well, I did in the fall of the year to Jefferson, Berkeley, Hampshire, Pendleton, Pocahontas, and other counties. My research is based in Pocahontas County and in the town of Cass specifically. In the autumn, color is beautiful there in late September. Having been from California, I found the rugged mountain region different. I began to explore and found Cass, a logging town of yesteryear. It was falling down, being abandoned. The old mill was there, but closed. Railroad up the Greenbrier River was still there, but more important, the rails to the top of Cheat Mountain to the town of Spruce. The method to get there is by a Shea engine. Each year I continued to visit that part of the state on high school visitation, and each year I became more interested in Cass. Several books have been written about the timber harvest of that area. W.E. Blackhurst, a Pocahontas high school teacher, wrote, "Sawdust gets in your eyes, of men in mighty mountain, riders of the flood, mixed harvest, and afterglow." Some have referred to those books as historical fiction, but I choose to call them factual fiction, for certainly they depicted somewhat accurately the events of the time. Another writer was Dr. Roy Clarkson, now a retired professor of biology from West Virginia University. He wrote Tumont on the Mountains and After Leatherbark. Dr. Clarkson's books could be classified as accurate with pictorial history, including names and places. Reading these books created more interest in the timber era. What had not been done became the question. After thought, it appeared that no one had located, interviewed, or taped interviews with any of the people who had been a part of that great history. Dr. Clarkston, in writing of his books, talked to many of the so-called woodhicks, but had not taped these voices. In 1974, the names of those men and women who were still living and who had worked in and around Cass were secured from a local bank to the mother of a student who was now attending Marshall. In the summers of 1975 and 1976, these individuals were interviewed and taped. Most of them were photographed. They could remember the town's growth and the events leading to that growth. Let us review, in part, that business history and what some of these people had to say about it. On the advent of the 20th century, West Virginia was an isolated region, untouched by the massive industrialization that was sweeping the country. West Virginia had an abundance of natural resources, such as coal, oil, gas, and timber. The forests in the New England states, New York and Pennsylvania, were depleting, and a search for more resources was growing. This new resource could be found in West Virginia, especially in Pocahontas County. During the Civil War, soldiers who passed through this region saw this abundant timber, and once the northeast timberland could not sustain economic benefits, these former soldiers cast their eyes once again upon the spruce-covered mountains of Pocahontas County, West Virginia. In 1880, the population of Pocahontas County was 5,591. The vast majority of the people in Pocahontas County in the 1880s were involved in subsistence farming. The majority of the men were farmers, and the women in the family were primarily involved in domestic work. The region of Green Bank could be found some blacksmiths, cabinet makers, carpenters, and a couple of school teachers and medical physicians. These occupations were only of slight economic significance. Also, the majority of the people in Pocahontas County were either native-born West Virginians or born in Virginia. By 1900, farming was still a major economic force. However, industrialization had invaded the region. The timber industry became one of West Virginia's top industries at the beginning of the 20th century, and Pocahontas County represents this trend. Pocahontas County is the birthplace of 8 rivers. Among those flowing through the county is the Greenbrier River and its various tributaries. With the Greenbrier River and these tributaries, lumbermen found Pocahontas County a prime location for timber and the waterways a vehicle for transporting lumber to different markets. The business of timber cutting started in Pocahontas County in the 1870s. However, most of the cutting was conducted around the banks of the Greenbrier because the timber could be transported down the Greenbrier River to lumber mills in towns like Ronsford. River arcs were used to push logs down the river, and William Buckley's father was a pilot on one of these river arcs.
They drove them out of here before the Cass Railroad came up here. They were riders of the flood and floated logs to Ronsford. My dad was one of them, and people said he was supposed to have been one of the best. During the summer, when they wanted to haul logs, Dad built a raft out of cherry or oak. They had him for a pilot for what they called arks, big houseboats that the men ate and slept on, had the horses. They had about 5 of them, one for cooking and eating in, one for sleeping, 2 for horses, one for an office, and one end and an office on the other for keeping horses shod and things of that kind. The only one they cooked and ate in was a little larger than the other, and that's the one they had my father pilot. He knew where the rocks were, where the currents were, where the bends were, and where the current would do to his raft. They had 3 or 4 men on the front car, 3 or 4 men on the back car, one on each end to guide it. He stayed up front and told them where to go, this way or that, depending on the current. They started in Cass in 1901, and it was before Cass was there. They would stack logs up. He'd build a raft. When the river came to rise, he would take them down to Ronsford. William Buckley, 1976.
In 1899, the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company established their headquarters in the Green Bank region of Pocahontas County. The town was later named for Joseph Cass, who owned a lumber company in Pennsylvania. His company merged with the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company in 1899. At Cass, the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company set up a site for their mill, and the company would send lumber to its pulp mill in Covington, Virginia. Thus, the site at Cass was primarily used for the Covington operation. Cheat Mountain was the Cass operation's primary source of spruce timber. However, on Cheat Mountain, there were no streams that could transport logs to the Greenbrier. In order to transport logs off Cheat Mountain, logging companies like the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company needed a new source of transportation. The railroad became this new form of transportation, and the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company in 1900 started laying track up Cheat Mountain, which had an elevation of 3,800 feet.
So the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company wanted to build it from Ronsford to Cass. They used Italians for grading.
Well, to build a railroad, they got their Italians, they get them by the train load out of New York, immigrants, you know. They'd come in, so they'd order so many men. If the men you had working, you couldn't get the work out of them you thought you should. Of course, everything was done by hand first. They dug railroad out with the grubbing on the show, wasn't bulldozers. If it didn't work, you go along your men and say, you fellows better speed up a little and get a little more done here. Plenty of men in New York. The last bunch of railroad workers were colored. They come from brush country up there. Because I'm still acquainted with all of them I seen here in town. They're always just awful tickled to see me. Shake hands with me like you had met somebody.
Shea engines were developed to help conquer high mountainous regions. The engines had various pistons that were connected to gears, which were connected to all wheels of the train. These engines were able to carry logs off the mountain.
Them roads are too crooked for to use these big other kind. They have one now still goes to gas there. Oh, it's over everywhere. Went by rail, went by railroad everywhere. New York, and even Ohio, and every place.
There's a picture of an engine that blew up right on a little mountain, right on top of the mountain.
Oh, yeah.
The water was low in the boiler, and when it got to the top of the hill, it went up into the flues, which they were hot in front, and it blew up and it killed one man, crippled another one.
Oh, yeah.
But we found a lot of pieces still.
In the town of Cass, lumbermen were able to purchase supplies from the Pocahontas Supply Company, which was a part of the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company. It was the main supplier of products for the region. William Buckley was an employee of the company.
When we were working in the store, Pocahontas Supply Company, we sold the camp a carload of oats to feed the horses. We'd charge it to West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company. If we sold some goods that went to the railroad, we charged the Greenbrier, Cheat, and Elk River Railroad, which made our sales way up there. There was a good old boy working in the office. He was a grown man, but he didn't look over 16 years old. At the end of the year, he went to make the inventory on the adding machine. The total was over $1 million, and the machine wouldn't handle it. He had to stop everything and order a new machine in the store. There were 20 men and 2 women working in the store. We did quite a lot of retail in a little place like Cass, $1 million worth of merchandise a year. We had a lot of groceries. William Buckley, 1976.
By 1910, the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company was the dominant employer in Cass, West Virginia, and the logging industry developed in all parts of Pocahontas County. The population had grown to 14,555 in 1910 as a result of the logging industry. These logging companies created new communities for loggers and their families.
Now, up on the mountain, there were the so-called American camps, had what they called the Bohunk camps, the Austro-Hungarian, the Italian. In our supplies, the supply days were Tuesdays and Fridays, and there were 5 little stores on the mountain like commissaries and one slated for workers. We charged the things going up to the camps to sell because they were going to West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company.
Oh, it's good. They fed you there, they fed you everything. Everything imaginable now they had on the table. This I know now. Had fresh meat pretty near all the time. Eggs for breakfast, you know, and cakes and everything else. All the pie and cakes, strawberry pies and custard pies. Just everything that you can buy out of the store now they have.
Back years ago, now when they run with the teams, before they got to using them old skidders, they had teams, you know. They met 5 or 6 teams, you know, at one camp. You have to have somebody to make roads, and somebody to make a pavement place to put your roadie logs off, and they used 100 men a lot of times.
The West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company primarily worked on Sheep Mountain. And on Sheep Mountain, these men were surrounded by various types of timber, but spruce was the dominant source of timber.
Oh, that spruce, you know, is the very best of lumber. Wonderful to see that country, the spruce timber, how it looks. Oh, it is beautiful. Looks like it's a shame to cut it.
A logger would work 6 days a week and usually all day long, dawn to dusk. Their life was in the woods, and this went on for months and even years. Drifters would usually come in the lumber camps passing through. They would work a little while and then move on.
People came and went at all times. There was a certain fellow who'd come to this camp today, stay overnight, eat his breakfast, then move to camp down the river. He wouldn't ask for a job. He'd move on down toward Tennessee or Louisiana or Alabama. Yeah, they'd come and go, you see. A lot of people come and go. They'd go to another one. If you talk to him, he'd say, I'm going to Louisiana or Alabama. They have so many sawmills there. Been everywhere, traveled around. Tramps, that's what they were. They didn't charge them anything. They ate at the table with the other men. It was supposed to be nobody asked for a job. In the morning, when the foreman came to the door and turned the men out to work, if the man had come in during the night, he sat still. He never moved. The boss would say to him, you want to go to work? What can you do? Can you drive a team, cut logs, or roll? He'd never come back in and ask the foreman for a job. They felt it was beneath their dignity to ask for a job. The boss was supposed to ask them. He usually did. He'd put them to work if he could use them at all, because a lot of them didn't stay but a little while. They moved on to someplace else. Come fall, he'd probably head for Louisiana. William Buckley, 1976.
Elmer Jones was a laborer for Warren Sawmill that I told you was over on the creek over here, and he got killed on the mill. The saw caught a slab and hit him in the head and killed him. Nobody knew where he came from. He was just a drifter that came in and went to work, a young man. And they kept his body as long as they could back at that time. Of course, nobody embalmed. And finally, the lumber company brought him up here and buried him there. Nobody's ever been here. Don't have any idea where it came from at all.
Each month, the company would travel to each camp and pay their employees. They paid their employees by check. The pay rate of the loggers would differ by occupations in each of the logging camps.
You know, teamsters and sawyers, they got $1.50 on board. Got $1.75 straight time.
They didn't pay you much. It was $1 and something a whole day.
The logging companies employed a few company doctors who worked for them. They traveled to different camps and made house calls. Likewise, they serviced other companies in the region. Each month, loggers had 75 cents deducted from their monthly pay for medical benefits. Loggers who were married had $1 deducted from their pay.
We had a Dr. Arbuckle up there first, and Dr. Hannah, Dr. Albert Boyes, he doctored up there, the one that's writing Randolph County history. They changed doctors about every 2 or 3 years.
What was the one that saved your leg?
Dr. Osborne. We used to have a hospital there. A fellow get hurt in the woods, they'd bring him down there to the hospital, and he had to pay the bill. The way the bill wasn't paid, it's not like things are now. I've been there at the hospital when they had that. Oh yes, they brought him down to be handy. They could doctor him, they looked after him. Well, they kind of left it up to you. They would ask you when you thought you'd be able to go to work and so on. But wasn't as bad. They had a good deal of consideration, the ones that I was acquainted with.
On the weekends, after a week of intense hard work, loggers would enjoy the pleasures of life. Drinking, fighting, and gambling, and other mischief were main forms of entertainment for loggers to enjoy away from the lumber camps.
That's an old castle booming. Every other door was a saloon. Oh, there'd be some of the biggest times fighting and everything.
Well, when they first started there, of course, they had bootleggers, speakeasies. I was there when they had speakeasies. About 1900, and it was a pretty wild town. Just like all lumber towns in them days.
By the 1940s, the timber industry in Pocahontas County was in decline. In 1951, the Mower Lumber Company bought the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company's holdings. In 1960, the United States government bought the remaining timberland in the region of Cass. The economic honeymoon in Cass and the rest of Pocahontas County was over. The economic boom which the lumber industry created in the county created opportunities for people in this region. The lumber industry in the county and in Cass was its greatest strength. This industry encouraged migration of countless people to this area, but the depletion of the forest helped encourage migration out of the area. Loggers who worked in the woods believed that this vast forest provided a future for them and their children, but with every tree and every acre of forest cut, these men helped determine the future of this area. They not only shaped the formation of the landscape, but also helped shape this region's destiny. These loggers may only be footnotes in history, but they are the ones who created this history. They are Cass, and this is part of the story of Cass. In the 1960s, many people attempted to save the railroad and to restore the town of Cass. Through the joint effort of many college students and others throughout the state, the West Virginia legislature purchased a large part of that and made it into a state park. Today, it is truly a tourist attraction, with thousands of people riding the old Shea engines to the top of the mountain at Spruce from the early spring to the late fall. Thank you. Well, I think you've gotten the idea. There were about 20 of these interviews that provide first-hand information as to the life and the times at Cass. What is the anticipated contribution to the Drinko Academy? First, these interview transcripts will be transcribed, enhanced, and placed on CD-ROM, and they are expected to be processed for publication. Second, with the cooperation that has been received from so many connected with Cass, a documentary may be produced. I think it might be titled, From Timber to Tourism, Cass, the First 100 Years. I think enough materials are available. We have prepared already a several-page script which will need to be expanded before it can be completed. Third, and not mentioned until this point, is the L.D. Fowler papers, which will be prepared for the archives of the Marshall University Library. Just a word about the Fowler papers. I discovered these papers in the Durban Mercantile Company in 1975. It appears from these documents that Mr. Fowler was a land agent for the Pocahontas Tanning Company, who acted in behalf of investors from 1900 until 1940. Many transactions are among his papers. In addition, his personal diaries for a period of 10 years are within that collection. About 1,500 original documents are included. Sample letters will be on display in the reception area after this presentation. Here is a 1910 diary of Mr. L.D. Fowler. It is important to thank so many people. All but one of those I interviewed is deceased. I had cooperation from William McNeil, the Pocahontas Times, and the Pocahontas Historical Society, who furnished many of the pictures used today. The family of William Buckley was also helpful with pictures and support. Luther Baker of Nicholas County supplied what I deemed as a recent discovery of countless negatives of scenes taken at the turn of the century until about 1950 by photographer Finley Taylor. John Killeran, who had a major role in the saving of the Cass Railroad, also furnished copyrighted pictures to be used with permission. The Marshall ITV personnel, and especially Eric Heim, with their tape enhancement. Mr. Zach Miller of the Drinko Technology Center deserves major credit. Without his untiring efforts and skill, this presentation would not have been possible. Also, I thank his supervisor, Brian Morgan. Jan Fox gave support. David Russell, the graduate assistant majoring in history, worked countless hours. Now, to John and Elizabeth Drinko, I present you a copy of a letter from the L.D. Fowler collection, signed by W.J. Ingram, president of the Bankers Mortgage and Trust Company, Euclid Avenue, at Public Square, Cleveland, Ohio, dated April the 4th, 1913. In addition, I'm presenting to you a CD-ROM of one of the interviews with Mr. Bruce Pritchard. To Dr. Gilly, who hasn't arrived, but is Dr. Angel still present? To Dr. Angel, I present a copy of the Pocahontas Times, February 17th, 2000 issue. This paper has been in business for more than 100 years. Please read on the article on page 5. I think you'll find it quite interesting. It looks back 50 years. I hope that the audience will view the pictures in the lobby, which were not in the presentation today. And I guess I should give a postscript. The town of Cass will celebrate 100 years on May the 26th, the year 2000. Log camp meals will be served in local restaurants. And get this, train rides will be free that day to Whitaker Station. Tammy Shoemaker of the Visitors Bureau is in attendance today, and I thank her for being here. Some closing remarks. You may have noticed that this is work in progress. More work will be completed on the materials viewed today. It took weeks to collect those interviews in 1975 and 76, and it will take many, many hours to transcribe them and go through the process of enhancement. I expect that I will listen to every word, some in Old English, and I fully expect to complete the project by this time next year. Please allow me just a moment to thank my wife, Jacqueline, who holds 2 degrees from Marshall, and my children, Lisa, who also holds 2 degrees from Marshall, the last being an MBA, and my son, Robert, Jr., holding a BBA degree from Marshall. He's in Chicago today and could not be here. They traveled with me throughout that period of 1975 and 76 while these interviews were taking place. Again, my thanks to you for being in attendance today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. It's a fascinating project, and whether you notice or not, I think Mr. William Buckley did the best of the interviews. Don't you?
Yeah, major part,
Yeah. Well, this concludes our program, and please be with us at the reception out in the lobby, and you have an opportunity then to talk to Dr. Alexander and find out some more fascinating material about this town called Cass, West Virginia. Thank you very much.